So it's been a while. I said I was gonna come back and do videos and I haven't. It is almost the end of March and you might be thinking, bitch, it's almost April and now you're coming with the favorites of 2022. Yeah, because this is gonna live here and I want to share with you what I read that I loved in 2022. I'm still reading tons and I just wanted to start sharing. I start overthinking these videos and I feel like that just stops me because I feel like it always has to be perfect. Like my background's not going to be perfect, hence why you see stuff laying around. This is a house, we live here. I don't need to be perfect at putting up these videos. Like, let's not overthink it. So why don't we get started? I was going to share stats and stuff like that. I'm not gonna get into it too much. I do have my Goodreads up here on my iPad. All right, so let's get started. So I read, in 2022, I read 68 books. I read a little bit less than 2021 in 2022 because I did start taking a course in late 2021 into 2022. 2022, I read 68 books. A lot of them were audio because I did a lot of studying and schoolwork. Sometimes I just need to listen to something while I'm driving, whether it's to work, running errands, cleaning. Let me tell you, audiobooks have been my savior during cleaning, my Sunday cleaning. Like, I will literally finish like half of a book. Now, I am not the best at describing books. This is something that I've just kind of also want to work on, is describing a book briefly without giving away too many details about it. I know for myself as a reader, I don't like going into books knowing way too much because I feel like that just kind of ruins it for like the element of surprise that you sometimes like about a book happen. I like going in blind. A lot of the times I like to know the very surface, especially with like mysteries and thrillers. And I think that's why I don't really read a lot of those anymore, because I feel like just reading the book cover, the inside of a flap, or listening to people's reviews, I'm like, I don't even need to read that anymore. So I have this book journal that I never really completed fully. But I did do my favorites for 2022, did top 10, and then I did honorable mentions. And looking at this and thinking about what I read, I know that I'm missing some books. I don't have all of these in my possession because actually most of them were either audio or they were from the library. So I'm gonna go ahead and share what I have, and whatever I don't, I will put here or here. So as number 10, I have Jodi Picoult, Wish You Were Here. A lot of people didn't like this book. I don't know why, and I guess maybe it's because it does have to do, it takes place in the time of the pandemic, which I didn't want to be reading about, but she is my favorite author and I trust her. I trust her with my emotions. I trust her ride. I just go with it. And no idea what was going to happen in this book. All I had was just the gist that this woman works for an art gallery, or yeah, I think that's what she works for an art gallery, and she and her soon to be possibly fiance is a doctor. She has like her whole life plan. She knows what she wants to do. She has like a 5-year plan. She knows that she expects her boyfriend to propose to her on this trip that they're going to be taking to the Galapagos. It's March 2020 and you already know what happens. So he tells her, just go. I have to stay. I can't go anywhere. I have to stay and help during this breakout of the Rona. So let's just say she goes and just don't read anymore. Don't read anything on the internet, just read it. And I think that the reason this was so important to me was because it made me cry at the end. I think just feeling, the story was good. There was a twist in here that I didn't see coming. And at the end, I felt like I relived some of the stuff that she talks about from the quarantine and going through that whole initial feeling of 2020, and I felt everything, and I just felt so emotional at the end that I bawled my eyes out. Like, I think I read the last few chapters with like eye boogers in my eyes. Have the things that kind of stood out to me, and I wrote something in here where I was just like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. So anyways, I read this in February of 2022. That's Wish You Were Here by Jodi Picoult. Number 9 is a book that I listened to on Libby. So a lot of the audiobooks that I listen to are basically through my library. I use the Libby app. And this one just kind of came up. So the book that I'm talking about is called The Things We Cannot Say by Kelly Rimmer. And she was a new author to me. I had never listened or read any of her books. And she seems to be pretty popular, I believe. It's a historical fiction. And it takes place over present day as well as looking back at history during World War II. And the audio was fantastic. I really fell in love with this book because I just feel like it just took me to a place and made me feel all the emotions that the characters back in the day were feeling. During the World War II era. And if you're not sick of a World War II story, you might want to listen to this one or read it. I really enjoyed it. I don't want to go too far into it other than it's basically starts with present day where this woman she's really old and she is the grandmother of the main character who is trying to figure out what she's trying to tell her. Her daughter or her son, I can't remember now, all the details, is autistic. And the grandmother is communicating with the daughter with her iPad. And she's trying to tell her that she needs something from her husband who has passed away, or like a message. There's something she's looking for and they're trying to figure it out. So she decides that she's going to go to Poland, where she's from, and then figure out what it is that she wants, that she needs before she passes, because I think she's really sick. Anyways, it kind of goes back into the history of the grandmother and everything that has led up to this point. It was just a beautiful story. I really enjoyed it. I can't remember all the details. It's been such a long time since I read it. But I just know that anything that makes me feel an emotion, I usually it'll be like stand out for me. The next book is by Emily Giffin. She was a first read for me. I had never read any of her books. This one is called Meant to Be, and I believe it came out last year. And it came up on Libby, and so I borrowed it, and I loved that book. I loved it. It basically takes place, it's almost considered like a historical fiction and like a retelling of the story of the Kennedys, but the son. So it doesn't tell you straight out that's what it's about, but when you start reading the story, you're like, are they talking about the Kennedys here? And then you figure out it's almost like a retelling. Okay, so the quick gist on Goodreads that I will give you. A restless golden boy and a girl with a troubled past navigate a love story that may be doomed before it even begins in this irresistible novel from the New York Times best-selling author of Something Borrowed and the Lies That Bind. Leave it at that. Just go in and enjoy, because it is a thrilling ride right from the beginning. And I listened to this and I did not want to put it down. That's usually a good sign. So that's one that I really, really enjoyed. So that was a favorite. The next one that I have is Mary Jane by Jessica Anya Blau. Let me just double check. Jessica Anya Blau. This book I had seen on Instagram so many times, and the cover I was like, oh, that seems like a 70s type of book, or I don't know, like something about it just made me feel like I wouldn't enjoy it. I don't know why. I was just judging. So I had listened to a podcast where somebody mentioned it, and they said that it was like one of their all-time favorites for the summer or something like that, and it just so happened to show up on my Libby as something that you can borrow in July. Let me tell you, it was like the perfect summer book. It is so fantastic. It was definitely a top favorite for me. It takes place in the 70s and it is like a coming of age story. And it is about Mary Jane, who comes from this family who is basically like super straight and narrow, you know, follow all the rules. You know, her family is very strict and she's trying to get a job for the summer. And she decides she wants to be like a nanny for the doctor in the neighborhood. I believe they're in the neighborhood, and the doctor is a psychologist, and so they were going to help out his wife and the doctor while they're doing their work during the day to be she's going to be a nanny to their child. This summer he has a famous singer, he has a famous person as one of his patients, and unconventionally he's actually treating him inside the home. And so this famous person plus his wife are staying with them during the summer, and he's treating them for drug addiction and all this stuff. And basically the story just takes place from there, and her experiencing such a different family from her own, and her coming into her own and seeing that not everyone is like your family, and just really seeing that the world is a lot different than what her typical bubble is, and her coming into her own. Again, it's a coming of age, such a fun book. I loved it. It was perfect for summer. The audio, if you get a chance, if you're trying to decide whether you should read it or listen to it, the audio was fantastic. I loved this book. And I did not have high hopes for this. I hope that I gave that book justice, because it is such a fun book. I highly recommend that you read it during like the warmer weather, like closer to summer. The next book that I'm talking about is Open Water by Caleb Azuma Nelson. This book is a novella. I read this during like April vacation, and we were headed to the White Mountains, and I read it while I was there. This book is so lyrical. So when you know when a book just makes you like, what? Like you just want to reread the words just to savor them, and you want to slow down. Even though this book is like super thin, the narrative in this book just makes you feel like, holy shit, I want to slow down and read that again, because damn, I felt that. Let's say what it's about first. This takes place in London. The main character is, what's his name? Actually, they're unnamed. The narration does take place in second person. So when he's talking, he's saying you. And so that kind of throws things off a little bit. But once you get into the story, it is like butter. It is so smooth. It is lyrical. It's just flavorful. Like, it's such a smooth story that you just like, I want to be here and just savor this and just enjoy it. Basically, he falls in love with this other woman that he meets in a pub. The story is about that, but also about the things that he faces in his everyday life, and how that affects his daily experience in London. And just, I don't know, like there's not a lot of plot to this. It's more of a character study, which I tend to love, but it was so just like, it was like reading an R&B song in a novella. I actually found a playlist on Spotify that I really enjoyed while I was reading this, and it was like perfect. It was a perfect to accompany this story. And again, this is like reading like one of those R&B songs that you're just like, damn, yes, I feel that. That's exactly how I felt reading this. And I can't even tell you again what it's about, but it's a love story, and I really enjoyed it. This is one that I definitely will be rereading. Ooh, that looks good with my nail polish. The next book that I have, I also read during the summer months, and this one was one that was a book listed for on the long list for the Booker Prize, and that is Trust by Hernan Diaz. I actually saw it at my library. Go into this not knowing anything, because I think so many people review this book and just give away so much that is So important in the discovery of what you're going into. Just go in knowing that it's a historical fiction. And I don't know that I can give it enough of what it's about to really make you interested in reading it. You may not be interested, but I loved it. Okay, I'm gonna give you a really brief synopsis because I can't even give you a good description. So this book is about wealth and talent, trust and intimacy, truth and perception. Even through the roar and effervescence of the 1920s, everyone in New York has heard of Benjamin and Helen Rask. He's a legendary Wall Street tycoon. She is a brilliant daughter of eccentric aristocrats. Together, they have risen to the very top of a world of seemingly endless wealth. But the secrets around their influence and grandeur incites gossip. Rumors about Benjamin's financial maneuvers and Helen's reclusiveness start to spread. I'm going to leave it right there. This book starts out really slow, and at first you're like, what is this even about? So just start, trust, no pun intended, just trust the process and read through the first section, because this book is broken up into sections. Just go in, not knowing anything else, and go from there. It was such an eye-opening, mind-boggling story for me that I was like, holy crap, what was this about? And I loved it. It was so well done. And I was glad that I went in not knowing everything about it, because I feel like so many people reviewed this book and just give away so much that you're just like, okay, it was just a fun discovery for me. So just go in knowing that that's where it starts, and trust the process. The next book that I want to mention is How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water by Angie Cruz. This was one that I listened to. No, this was one actually that I also borrowed from the library around the same time as Trust. And Angie Cruz is a Dominican author, which for me, I had never read her, but I have a few of her books on my shelf. And I had heard so many people talk about this book initially when it came out that I was like, okay, I know I've said this before. I've heard my parents and family say, don't drown in a glass of water. It's a saying that Dominicans say. I'm sure other Hispanic cultures do, or Latino cultures do say that. And basically, how not to drown in a glass of water is like how not to, cry over spilled milk, or how not to drown in a glass of water is what it means. It's like, don't drown in a glass of water. You're making a big deal out of it. So, what am I saying? So this book features Cara Romero. So she's being interviewed by a job counselor, and this takes place in New York City, Washington Heights, which I partly grew up in. And so a lot of what she was talking about I was familiar with. And Cara Romero is like your beloved 50-something, 60-year-old Dominican aunt who is a little cray, but she is loving. And she is interviewed by this job counselor. But the interview is really not run by the job counselor. It's really run by Cara Romero, because she'll be asked a question and then she kind of goes off and tells her life story, basically. And she talks to her about why she feels she would be right for certain jobs, but she goes and tells the details of what has happened in her life to lead her to that, to why she is where she's at, to why she would be fantastic in certain positions because of what she has experienced. But she doesn't just say them. She kind of tells you the story. It is such a wonderful book. I loved it. I laughed out loud so many times. You learn to love and take Cara Romero as like, I want to be with her and just laugh my ass off, because it's hilarious. There are certain parts that are really sad and you're just like, damn, this is heartbreaking. But there's so much humor in there that you just you feel it all. And it was just such a wonderful book. That's another book that I definitely need to own. It was just wonderful. And it's very short, but it packs such a good punch in like such a small little book. I loved it, and I am excited to read more of Angie Cruz's work. Number 3 is my first by Isabel Allende, which is a surprise. I had started some of her other books in the past and just never got through them. This one I actually listened to on Libby and loved it so much that I knew I had to get a hard copy. And someone very special to me actually got this for me. And so I have it in hard copy because I definitely want to reread this again. The book, obviously, as you see, is gorgeous, freaking gorgeous, and it matches my nails again. It's called Violetta, and it basically spans 100 years. Okay, we start in present day. Violetta is about a centurion, 100 years old, and she's writing a letter to her grandson or great-grandson. And she basically starts from the beginning, where she was born. She was born at the height of a pandemic in 1918, and we go from there. And it takes place in Chile, but there's no, like, the country is not named. I believe that Isabel Allende is a Chilean author, and so it does take place in Chile. And I learned a lot about Chilean history just kind of looking up some of the stuff that she mentions in here, because I don't know anything about that history. Fun to kind of go back and like search up some of the stuff, some of the things that she actually mentions in here, because that's one of the things that I love about historical fiction, is that when you're not familiar with certain things that are being mentioned about things that happened during the time of the story, you can look them up. And that's the beauty about the internet, is that you can look some of this stuff up and learn about it on your own, which is my favorite way to learn about history. Not just US, but all over the world. Anyways, it spans 100 years. You go through her life as a child, coming of age, into her teenagehood in her 20s, different love interests and marriages that she goes through, her children, up until when she leaves Chile and then she's in the United States. I don't remember everything because this was like, I think I read this in December, and I just know that I loved it so much that I was like, oh my gosh, I need to read this again. This book is beautiful. I highly recommend it, especially if you're an Isabel Allende fan. It's an epic story. It'll just sweep you in from the beginning till the end. And there are parts where I found like there was a lot about the history that I was like, okay, let's get through this. Like, you know, every book has its own little parts that you're just like, okay, let's just get through this part real quick. I definitely had a few points where I did find that. Okay, I got a phone call, so I'm not sure where I left off. So anyways, highly recommended. I love the story. It actually made me look into Isabel Allende's other books. We will be reading more of her this year or in the coming future. The next book that I have, I also read during that April vacation. I actually listened to on Libby as well. And I started it on the drive heading to the White Mountains. And at first I was like, oh, this is kind of boring. I don't know if I want to listen to this. And something like told me, just stick with it. And this is Count the Ways by Joyce Maynard. I have a few of her other books that were highly recommended by a podcast that I used to listen to forever ago. I don't know if any of you listened to Books on the Nightstand back in the day. We're talking about, it's been a while. But I love that podcast, and they had recommended one book by her that I bought and just have never read. I saw it on Libby, and so I was like, oh, let me just listen to that. Loved it. Once I got into the story, I could not put it down. And this is a thick one. This is actually the thickest book that I read this year. I loved it so much that I had to get a had to get a copy for myself. And this one I actually found at a book sale, at a used book sale. So I was excited about that. Let me tell you what it's about. It starts out kind of like in present day. So I kind of like these books where you start out in the future and then it looks back in the timeline, like from the beginning, just to tell you where what led to everything that they're experiencing in the present moment. So it starts out this woman kind of just saying where she's at, and she sees she's at her son's wedding, and she's divorced. Her other kids are there, and her ex-husband is there. And then she kind of retells the whole story from the beginning when they met in the 70s onward. What a wonderful, sweeping story this was. It was packed with their life. So it tackles so many things that you're just like, oh my gosh, it tackles marriage, it tackles children, their issues, or infidelity, family, career. There is some sexual assault in here that she deals with as a young person. There's a lot, and I felt like, like when those stories everything's filled in so richly that you feel like you're watching a movie, and there's every little detail is just not details, but it's like almost like you're a fly on the wall with this family right from the beginning till present day. And I love that. I definitely want to read this again. And she does have a second book coming out actually this year she didn't mean for this to be a duology, but it kind of spins off from something that she works on in this story. Highly recommended. I love this. I since have purchased some of her other books used, and will be purchasing her next one that follows this one. My number one book of this year actually was a really big surprise for me. I had been meaning to reread this book because I read it as a 15-year-old when I was in high school. And I read it as a sophomore, and I have to say, I don't even think I finished it. At that point, I don't even think I understood it. I just knew the gist of it, and in order to complete my assignment, I think I even just watched the movie at the time, which was really too bad because this ended up being my favorite. But then again, I just don't think I had enough understanding to get this book, okay? The book that I'm talking about is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This book has been a favorite of so many people here on YouTube that I said, you know what, I'm gonna have to reread that. I had a copy that I had purchased at a used bookstore. I hated the cover, and I think it's still on my shelf. I need to get rid of it. I didn't want to read it because the cover is horrendous. I'm sorry. The cover matters. It just does, okay? And it's a soft cover, so it's not like I could take off the jacket. It was like one of those Barnes and Noble editions, and the words were so tiny. I'm like, okay, my aging eyes can't even. They just can't. So I said, you know what? I want to get a really nice copy of this. And so I was able to get this. I believe I got it on Amazon. Yeah, I think I just got it on Amazon. Look how beautiful this edition is. I mean, that alone makes you want to pick it up. This is the Penguin Classics Deluxe Edition. It has deckled edges, which I actually like. Some people don't like that at all. I love deckled edges. I don't care. It just looks pretty. And it has like the little flap on the inside with the art. And look at the art in the back. I mean, and again, that goes well with my nails. Because it matters, right? And look at the front cover. I'm sure a lot of you have probably read this. She's an orphan, and she goes to, this is like the last book that I read for 2022, and it was my favorite of the year. I still remember how I felt reading this whole thing. I loved it. I feel like I'm not a classics person because I feel like it takes me a little while to kind of get into them, and they do. I mean, the writing is a little different. This is probably like an easy classic to read because I've read other classics and I'm just like, oh my God, I need big brain energy to be reading this, and I just need to be in a certain mode. This one, yes, there's a little bit of that, but it wasn't that hard to read, okay? Jane Eyre is an orphan. She is sent to live with her aunt, who is her dead uncle's wife. Okay. She has two cousins who live with her who treat her like shit. Okay. Though aunt treats her like shit, she is treated like pure shit. Let's just say it. And it starts there, and you go through Jane's life and what she has experienced as a child and how that takes her through her life forward. Okay. She is sent to live in a school for girls, away from them, and you go from there. And then she gets a job at this as a governess, which is almost like a nanny back in the day. You probably already know a little bit about this book if you've read it, number one. Number two, if you've kind of listened to other YouTubers or other people talk about this book. And I don't want to go too much into that because I feel like I remember like listening to reviews and not wanting to know all the details. I didn't remember all the details about this book, and I didn't want to hear it from other people. I just wanted to be able to discover it on my own. And that was the beauty of this. I loved the story. My feminist self did not have an issue with this book. This book was written in the 1800s. So there are a lot of people who have issues with how this was written in terms of Jane Eyre and her falling in love with her boss. Her master, what she calls him master. I mean, back in the day, you called your boss master, I guess, if you're a governess. Whatever. Just read it for what it is, okay? I loved it. It's a love story, and it takes place also after her leaving, and I loved it. I even watched the movie after. I rented a movie on Amazon Prime. It was like the most recent one, I believe, and I even made my boys watch it. I love this so much. They were like, what is going on? It was a beautiful book. I love beautiful story. This is definitely one of my all-time favorites. I will have to put it on that list, which I will have to make a video of my all-time favorite books. I just really fell in love with the story, and it was like reading it for the first time, which really it was, because as a 15-year-old, I just didn't get it. And the writing was just kind of like too removed for me at that time. And I actually will have to do a video on books that I read as a teenager that I'm rereading now, because there was another one in 2021 that I read, a classic from high school that was also a top favorite for that year. So there's something to be said about things they make you read in high school. Let's just say that. Having said that, in my long ass winded way, I hope that you guys enjoyed your video. Let me know what some of your favorites in 2022 were. If anything that I mentioned you've read before and you liked it or you disliked it, if you don't agree with anything that I had to say today, let me know. I would love to know what books you disliked if I loved it, and why, because why not? That's the whole conversation about books. That's the beauty about reading books, is not everybody's gonna love the same books that you read. And if you want more videos like this, let me know if this is something that you would want to continue to see. I do have some recipe videos that I want to put in. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.